Parsons wasn't robbed. He was silenced. On the night of March 1st, 2006, a man dressed in dark clothing was seen in a dark-colored sedan, just on the other side of the hotel parking lot where Mr. Parsons regularly parked his car. This man entered the parking lot, got into an altercation with Mr. Parsons, and then he executed him with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Now, you will learn that Mr. Parsons worked in the fine arts business, and you will also learn that he was under investigation for his repeated dealings with the notorious crime boss, Roger Willerman. It is simply not reasonable to expect Everyday Inn to prevent an ordered hit by a notorious crime boss, because this was not a spontaneous robbery. Mr. Parsons was executed to ensure his silence. Good morning. My name is Scott Swybish, and along with my co-counsel Catherine Rankin, we represent Everyday Inn. Now, you all know the name Everyday Inn is a hotel chain, but behind every name is a face. And today, that face for Everyday Inn is Mr. Donovan, the manager of the New Palm City Airport Hotel. Everyday Inn purchased this hotel from the Hilton Corporation in 1999, and then they spent about a year renovating it. They improved almost everything. Aside from upgrading the rooms, modernizing the entrance and common areas, and repaving the driveway and parking areas, Everyday Inn also took several steps to improve the security at this facility. Today, my co-counsel will walk you through the grounds of New Palm City Hotel, as it was on the night of Mr. Parsons' tragic death. Walking onto the grounds, the hotel is here on the eastern side of the lot, and the parking lot was here on the west. As you will see, there is only one entrance onto the property here off of 5th Street, and there is only one entrance into the parking lot here. During the renovations, Everyday Inn repaired and rebuilt the walls around the perimeter. They removed an old valet kiosk to install the security station at the parking lot entrance. They installed new lights, and they installed a new video security system with monitors, which could be seen both in the parking lot security station as well as the security office inside the hotel. You'll learn from Mr. Donovan about the new security features and the two people who worked to design these features. The first of these two people is G.B. Masterson, the Chief of Security for the New Palm City Hotel. Mr. Masterson worked for Palm County Sheriff's Department for 20 years before coming to work for Everyday Inn. Over the course of 20 years, he dealt with the crime in the city. And over the course of 20 years, he knew what type of crime to expect in this neighborhood. He brought this local knowledge to the table where he worked alongside Greta Wilson, the Everyday Inn security chief for the whole southeast region. You'll learn that Ms. Wilson also worked in law enforcement as a detective, where she spent 22 years working in the major crimes unit before spending the last 16 at Everyday Inn. Now, you may hear testimony today about some recommendations that Ms. Wilson made after the renovation of this hotel had been completed. Some of these recommendations were followed, and others were not. But despite these decisions, you will learn that there has never been any crime of violence or any type of robbery at this hotel until the night Mr. Parsons was silenced. On that night, Mr. Parsons checked into his hotel room just as he had done many times in the past. And Mr. Donovan will tell you about how Mr. Parsons would check into his regular room over by the pool. He would then go out to his car, park it in the same location, take his briefcase out of his trunk, and bring it to the front desk to be kept in the hotel safe overnight. You will learn that this briefcase regularly had large amounts of cash, and sometimes even jewelry carried in it. During this trial, you will hear from Mrs. Parsons, and she will tell you about the relationship between her husband and Mr. Willerman. She will tell you that they regularly conducted business together, and you will learn that at one point, Mr. Willerman had even threatened Mr. Parsons over these dealings. You will also learn through the course of this trial that Willerman was under investigation, and that Mr. Parsons was also being investigated. The police had a search warrant for Mr. Parsons, and they were monitoring his bank accounts. That is how we know that Mr. Parsons had just taken out $100,000 of his personal account to bring on his trip, even though he was only going to the Bahamas on vacation, not for work. The police wanted to question him, but before he could even flee the country, he was silenced. Now, you're also going to hear from two expert witnesses during the course of this trial. The plaintiff's expert will tell you that Everyday Inn was negligent, and that this caused the death of Mr. Parsons. This expert, Mr. Howard, will also give you an opinion that this was the result of a random act of violence. However, he will admit to you that based on the evidence at the scene, the police thought this was the result of organized crime. You'll also learn that despite his background of building security, Mr. Howard has never worked in law enforcement. He's never worked at live crime scenes, and he has never conducted forensic examinations of crime victims after murder. But you will learn that opinion is actually based on an incorrect standard of care, a standard of care that fails to take reasonableness into account. What happened to Mr. Parsons is without question a tragedy, and nobody here today will try to convince you otherwise. There's no question of the pain that his family must be experiencing at this time. But the fact is that this is not what is at issue during today's trial. This trial is about whether Everyday Inn should have foreseen this type of crime taking place on their property, and if so, whether or not they took the steps to provide reasonable precautions to protect their guests. We don't deny that Everyday Inn does have a responsibility to provide reasonable security, but they met that responsibility. At the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Catherine Rankin, will come before you, and she will ask you to find Everyday Inn not liable for the tragic death of Mr. Parsons. Because Mr. Parsons was not simply robbed in a parking lot that night. This was not a spontaneous act, nor was this something that has ever happened at this hotel before. Mr. Parsons was not robbed. He was executed in order to ensure his silence.